What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Find out every Monday at 8 on Notes from an Artist. Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist. Revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. Every Monday at 8 on CygnusRadio.com. And check out previous episodes on our podcast. NotesFromAnArtist.buzzsprout.com.
All right, Notes from an Artist. David, let's talk about Karl Berger. Actually, David, I think we could do a show called Notes from Karl Berger and do it every week.
His book, The Music Mind Experience, just looking at my highlights, I think I've got more highlights than actual reading material here. Listen to this. Is this a great quote or not? I wish I could write a book where the readers would say, if it is that easy, I will get an instrument and play one too.
Well, that's what Karl Berger is all about. And I like what another quote from him is, music is a natural state of mind. And for those of you in our audience who don't know who Karl is, he is a composer, he is an arranger, he is a conductor, he is a pianist, he is a vibraphonist, he is an educator, he is the artist in residence for many, many universities. Just a short list of his collaborations. Jeff Buckley, Natalie Merchant, Better Than Ezra. Remember them, David? Sly and Robbie, Bill Laswell. He's recorded with Don Cherry, Lee Konitz, John McLaughlin, Dave Holland, Bud Ulmer, Pharoah Sanders. Incredible. Go look him up. He is the founder and director of the Creative Music Foundation, and it's all about the power of music and the commonality to all cultures. David, he is probably one of the most forward-thinking interviewees we've had on this show.
It was really inspiring and enlightening. He thinks each and every one of us has more musical talent than we could even imagine, which is very similar to what Einstein says about our brains. That if we knew what we could do, we'd be shocked. This is a great interview, folks. You're going to really learn quite a lot about not just Karl Berger, but about all the music. For instance, when you were talking about his playing with John McLaughlin, I bought an import on Dawn Records. Do you remember Dawn Records?
I do not,
London?
But
It was he and Karl was on Vibes. It was a record called Where Fortune Smiles. And we'll play some of the tracks from that during our show. It was one of the most incredible, 1969, really some incredible, groundbreaking stuff that was going on in England. And, when you listen to McLaughlin, you go, so that's why Miles hired the guy. So, it's very, very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. But there's one thing that Karl said also that really amazed me. And, as primarily a fretless bassist, his comment really hit home. You will never hit the same note twice, which makes sense because all of us fretless players are lucky if we hit that note once. No, but seriously. So what he's trying to allude to is every environment, every time, let's say you hit a G note, you're hitting it harder or softer, and it will never be exactly the same. And it's a very, very fascinating thought, don't you think?
Absolutely. To play an instrument, Karl, is going to make you pick up your instrument like you've never picked it up before. And if you don't play an instrument, you will play an instrument because, like you said, Karl says there is musician in all of us.
Hey, folks, listen. www.creativemusic.org /Music Mind. Pick up the book, go to the website. He does courses. He does online courses. He does creative courses up in Woodstock, New York, if you're in the area. This guy's great, and you're going to love this interview.
My name is Tom Semioli and David C. Gross, and we approve of this message.
So happy to have you here. I'd like you to go over some of the stuff. I think the book's fantastic. I think both people who play a musical instrument and those who just listen would benefit from this.
Right. There you are. That's the idea.
In the spirit of music mind, David and I both, we're going to improvise and we're going to ask things that we've done research on. One of the quotes that struck me about the book is where you say that music is a natural state of mind. What do you really mean by that?
What I mean by that is like we are born, the way we are born, when we're born, we play, right?
Right.
As kids, you play. Like if you, from age 0 to, let's say, 1 or so, there's nothing but play.
Right.
That's a state of mind that's sort of natural for us. And that state of mind never leaves us. It never does. We're all kids. We're always kids, no matter how old we are. And basically, music is a kind of form of communication that cannot really rely on rational intelligence alone, because thinking is just not fast enough for music. When you play, you play. It's like a different state of mind. When you think, you think. It's a different state of mind. And a lot of music nowadays is played from the thinking point of view. And it just feels heavy and it does feel playful, And essentially, music is we are sort of all born musicians, so to speak, whether it shows itself in sound or in other areas. But we are born to play, and it's a kind of thing that we can always tap. We can always go there. As soon as you stop thinking, which is what the meditators know, then you play. You're in a play state. You're in a state of mind and this is what I call the music mind.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned in the book that emphasis on performance. It's funny, I was a music minor at the University of Miami. I didn't major in music. I didn't want to waste all my parents' money. But it's interesting that my performance classes only got 1 credit, but my theory classes got 3 credits. And the whole point of learning theory was so you could perform. Right. And yet it fascinated me at the University of Miami, which is an acclaimed, school for jazz and studio music, did not emphasize performance. And yeah.
I was chair of music departments both in Europe and in the US, and in both cases the same thing happened. The people just get all caught up in the rationality of it all. And most people that are at these universities are just like people who didn't make it as performers, or are pretty good, but they're not just can't really go to that playful state of mind, because you have to totally succumb to that. You need to learn to become a kid when you play. Yeah. You need to sort of stop thinking. All the thinking that has to go into music has to happen before you play. But once you play, you play. It's a whole other state of mind. And that state of mind is not considered to be a state of mind that can be practiced. But I learned from my Zen studies and my studies with Tibetans that are here in Woodstock over many, many years that you can very well practice your play mind. That's what meditation is. It basically is practicing not thinking. Or learning how to get the thinking into a gray zone where it's no longer affecting you, where you no longer have your first reaction to your thinking. Your first reaction should be to your intuition. Sam. So this is true for painters or writers or players. It doesn't matter. It's all music. It's from my point of view.
Back in 1971, I would go to this particular record store that sold imports, and I picked up this album. It was called Where Fortune Smiles. It had some lineup. It had John McLaughlin on guitar, John Sermon on sax, Dave Holland on bass, Stu Martin on drums, and of course, on piano and vibraphone, the great Karl Berger, our guest. The tune is called Glancing Backwards. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. I think there are 2 other points. That I own a company that brings musicians into the New York City schools.
Okay.
And so I see musicians going in to teach, which was my concept, versus a music teacher. And there's a third thing that I think a lot of music teachers have, besides the first 2. They've been inundated with, in a lot of cases, parental, you need a job, you need a this, you need a that. So they're almost frightened to take that leap to be a professional musician.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It is a scary moment, because we learn from age, where we go to school at preschool, 5, and even way before, we learn to control everything by thinking. And the schools are emphasizing nothing but, it's like this is what you learn. You learn to, and you think, even now, we think that we are controlling most things by thinking, but that's not even true. Everyday life, you avoid accidents by reacting, not by thinking.
Right.
Reaction is usually faster than the thinking could ever be. You avoid getting killed because you get out of the way. And getting out of the way happens before you think about it. But later we think, oh yeah, we were doing the right thing, thinking that we were controlling it, but we weren't. We were just reacting. And basically, that's the play mind that's in the fort. That's really happening within everybody. That's what keeps you alive, actually.
As you're talking in the book about intuition, this is really intuition. That's what or the body knows, get out of the way.
Right. And you know the saying, first thought, best thought?
Right.
Well, the first thought is instinct. It's not thinking. You see a person and you immediately have a reaction to that person, right? That's going to be like the most important point right then and there. After that, you start to rationalize all kinds of things, You always come back to what your first reaction was.
Yeah, how true is that? And, you make a wonderful point about deep listening and how and it's so typical while I'm talking, your mind's thinking of answers, but sometimes when you're thinking of the answer and not hearing exactly what's being said, your answer is wrong because you haven't been listening. And I love that aspect of the book.
Right. Well, just think about what's happening politically in this country. Nobody is listening.
As a matter of fact,
they have the answer right before they got the question, so nobody is really listening. Like when somebody says, oh yeah, I'm listening. No, you're not. Like there's always another level to go to listen. Listen means not being involved in anything else but listening. Go to and there's a lot more to listen for every time. It's incredible how detailed listening can become. Like deep listening is like a huge, huge project, something that you should practice with your kids in the school. They should be learning these things.
I quoted something from your book here is listening is really what's missing in the world right now. For example, many discussions between people are interrupted or end with one of them saying, but you're not listening to me. People's ideas are set in their minds. And when they get together to discuss things, they're not really discussing. They're just putting out their points. How true. What a metaphor for virtually everything, right?
Right. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But, musically speaking, you can go a lot further, like, for example, what people in music schools should be learning is that there's no such thing, for example, as a note. A, B, C notes. There's only sound. And every note that you play on any instrument has multiple sounds combining with each other because it depends on the room that you are in, depending on the time of the day, depending on all kinds of factors of why that sound is a little different from last time when you play that note, right? So once you get aware of these over and undertones that are happening, of which there are literally thousands. I think a measurement said to me that a 16-bit recording has something like several million over and undertones. And you can see that in the images, like when you record, let's say you look at the Pro Tools recording, you see all these images, right, that come up, a note. Now go to the piano and try to recreate that same image. It's no way that you will ever do that, because every time that note is different. So you never play the same note ever again in your life. Never. So once you get to that level of listening, all music is new. Like Bob Dylan can sing his song about 1,000 times. It'll always be a new song.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Or Miles Davis was like that.
That was a 1971 live recording of Miles in Copenhagen doing Miles Runs the Voodoo Down. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Like Miles was up to that. Yeah, definitely. I've just looked at a Miles documentary, and he said there's no such thing as a wrong note. You can only play it wrong because you haven't been listening. The note itself cannot be wrong.
And that brings up your point. All tones are very complex sounds, and whether they will blend or not is a question of how we play them dynamically together.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had like an improvisers orchestra in New York I think it was from 95 to 2000. We started at the Stone, John Soane's place, the Stone, and we played there every Monday for a year. And there was about 20 musicians coming together. And the first 10 minutes, this is also something that should happen in schools. I told the people, okay, now let's play a long tone, any note you want. And it would play some real cacophonic sound would come out, right? And now I said, okay, now let's play that same note and just listen to the whole sound of the orchestra and tune it to that. Whatever you need to do dynamically, tuning-wise, whatever you need to do, And so the next time, it sounded a lot better. But after 10 minutes of practicing that, it sounded like a lush recorded harmony. Yeah. The same notes. And as a matter of fact, there was a journalist, I think I mentioned it in the book, from the Wall Street Journal who came in.
Right, you did, yes.
Yeah, and he wrote about the lush sound, the lush harmonies that he heard. Well, there was not one note written.
That was Karl Berger with the Creative Music Workshop doing an excerpt from Children of Conduction. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com. So the first year I opened the business, I started teaching in the schools myself because I needed to get a handle of it. My very first class, I'm scared to death. It's second graders in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And the first thing I do, I walk in the door and I slam the door shut. Right. And kids are like this. And I'm going, now some people would say that's a musical sound.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And so we had a great time. And
the main thing you did is you got their attention.
That's for sure. But what was so nice is I would go back to the school after, I then started writing curriculum and stuff. But the kids, as they got there's the music man. So There was an impression. And when you see those young kids doing this, it's amazing. It is really amazing.
Well, I'll tell you something that I didn't write in the book. When I first came to New York, I came with the trumpeter Don Cherry, who was he was in Paris and he started a band, and we played in Europe for a couple of years before we came here to record for Blue Note. And this is how I came to New York.
That was a tune called Cocktail Piece from Don Cherry's album Live in Montmartre, 1966. It featured Don Cherry on trumpet. He composed it. Gatto Barbieri on tenor. Karl Berger, our guest, on vibraphone. Bo Steve on bass. And drums was Aldo Romano. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com.
And then I got a gig, fairly steady gig, playing for an organization called Young Audiences.
Oh, sure.
And Young Audiences was putting on concerts for sixth graders in New York City schools, which is probably what you're doing.
Similar, yes.
Yeah, and we were the only improvising group. Everybody else was classical in that program. And we had some real strong guys like Sam Rivers and Reggie Workman and people like that in the group. And we would play like 2 concerts per day, one at 10 and one at 12 in 2 different schools for 45 minutes for sixth graders. And the experience from that is what got me to start at the Creative Music Studio. Because there I could see, now it wouldn't be sixth graders, they'd probably be 4th graders, the innocence with which people would go for just sound and not for style. There was like no style at all. And as a matter of fact, some of the ideas that these kids came up with, we would ask the kids, come up with something that we can improvise with. They would make up melodies and we would improvise on them and show them how we would use that material, And there was a couple of experiences. And the main one is that the majority of of the kids were totally with us, note for note, because they had not been trained yet to think in terms of rock and roll or jazz or classical, or they just heard sound.
Well,
and
Charles Gale would say to me that he would do what Charles Gale does with kids, and they would love it. That was a piece called Compassion Number 2. That was Charles Gale's trio with Larry Rowland on bass and Michael Thompson on drums. This is Notes from an Artist, cygnusradio.com. That is definitely the way to go. But that's the thing. Kids they haven't thought things out yet in terms of what they like and what they... around 6th grade, they're starting to develop their peer pressure for what they're going to listen to.
Well, now it would be probably younger even, But at the time, as 6th grader, was totally open, completely open territory.
Yeah, it's great. It is.
But there was also one thing, tell you a story from a school in Harlem. There was a girl, and so I said to her, make up a little line that we can improvise with. And she started, I didn't do that. We didn't. We went all over the place. And I said, wow, this girl really doesn't know what she's doing. And we started playing, and she stopped us. She said, no, that was not it. She knew every note that she had been singing.
Oh, my God, that's great.
We had to spend like 10 minutes to learn that line. It was so complicated.
Oh, boy, that's great. That is wonderful. That was a great record. I got that back in 1969 when I was working at the Record Hunter in New York City, right next to Carnegie Hall. As a matter of fact, it brings up that terrible joke. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. So that was a tune called Get Up from the album Tune In. It featured Dave Holland on bass, Carlos Ward on saxophone and flute, and the great Eddie Blackwell on drums. This is Notes from an Artist, cygnusradio.com.
Getting back to, the Miles Davis thing, you said there's no such thing as a wrong note, David. What's the old joke in jazz? If you make a mistake, play it twice so they think you meant it, right? So
he said actually something like this. The next note that you play can correct the one that you feel was bad.
Karl, I want to do a T-shirt that says, you're a half step away from sounding like shit.
Well, on either side of a wrong note is a right note, theoretically.
What he was saying is, if you play a bad note, it's basically just like because you were not attentive to that note. It's not that the note was wrong. It's just like you didn't tune it right, like you didn't make it sound right. And so, therefore, for example, if you repeat it next, you play the same note again, that makes it right. In other words, now you're saying, oh, no, that's where I want to go. Or you play the next note and you are actually making that first note being a run-through, to that note. Right. Now we made it right again, I remember Don Byers was an alto player in his swing time. There's actually a story about him where a kid asked him for a jazz lesson. He said, well, first of all, it's $100, So the kid said, oh, Jesus, that's a lot of money. When he comes up with the $100 and says, so what's the lesson? And he said, the lesson is I can put in one sentence. He said, it's either on or it's a run-through.
In music, Mon, you emphasize that improvisational music is the most natural form of music, yet in the real world, or the supposed real world, improv music is considered avant-garde when it's actually the other way around. I think people who play the same thing over and over again is probably less natural than people who simply improvise.
I don't make such a difference myself. I grew up trained as a classical pianist in Europe, but I gave up the idea of pursuing that as a career because I just didn't want to play just music of some people from 200 years ago. Right. And I wanted to play my own music. And essentially, when you look at the history of music, there was no such thing as written music 400 years ago or 500 years ago. Music was improvised for millions of years. Ever since there's human beings on earth, we play music, right? Well, there was no such thing as written music.
Or recorded music.
It's like a brand new thing. In other words, writing music was the way for these people to record their music. Like if Bach would be living now, he'd probably be an all improviser because he could just record it rather than write it down. on. Pretty sure that Bach didn't even play what he wrote. I don't think so. I think I let all the other people play, but he would probably improvise, because that was just one way of playing this piece, is what he wrote, you know. All these guys in the 18th century particularly were improvisers. They were all improvisers. Mozart was very well known to be like totally, and Beethoven, even I saw a letter by Beethoven where he wrote to a friend, he's playing his next piano concerto tonight with an orchestra, but he hasn't finished the piano part yet. He only has the orchestra parts, but the guy who pays for it all is coming to the concert. So he put some paper on, and turned paper, there was nothing on it, while he was playing the piano part, you know. These guys could do that. The other point that I'm trying to make is, and I think I do it in the book too, anybody that plays music, whether it was written down before or not, has to be in the same play mind to play it. If you just play it from what you know, the knowledge of it will shine through. It's sort of like it's going to sound old. But if you play it as if you had never played it before, like every note is new, even if you have learned it like 1,000 times before, then you are really playing. You know, like the great classical piano players all play by heart. When you go to a concert, a violinist or a pianist who is a soloist will not read. They will be playing by heart. Now, they know the notes before, but they don't know the sound before from that orchestra, from that situation. So in a lot of ways, they are improvising. They're not improvising the notes themselves, but they're improvising the sound, the quality, the feeling of that concert is different from what they, let's say, did in a recording or in another concert. And so they are improvisers in their own way.
One of the things in reading your book that struck me is, you know, when I'm on stage performing with, let's say, a horn section, and they've been doing these charts forever.
Yeah, exactly.
The rhythm section, piano player, or maybe the musical director has charts, but the rhythm section, guitar player are standing there. They have no stand in front of them. But the horn section, who's been playing this over and over again, has this sheet music on the stand in front of them. It always baffles me because, A, I don't think it looks good. Just from a purely aesthetic point. But don't you guys know this music by now?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right. It's like I've been coaching people over time. Some people react to the book by calling me for coaching sessions. And that's what I do. Like I help people to get into their own music. If somebody is like stuck, usually people get stuck with developing or believing in their own music. Let's even put it that way, you know. And one of the things I do with them is learn a new tune, but learn it by heart first. Don't learn it from the paper. Then you use the paper to remember the tune, but not to learn it from the paper. Once you learn it from the paper, it never quite gets into you. You always need this paper for some reason. So this is why I'm saying the great classical players all learn their music by heart. By heart is it's a great American expression, by heart. You play from the heart rather than from the head. And you can only do that if you learn the music without having to read it. So you can play written music, but you should be internalized so that you can process it through your heart.
That was our guest, Karl Berger, with Dave Holland and Ed Blackwell, tune called Ornette. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com. You also talk about singing being an important way to get started, and I think that's wonderful.
Well, you know, the singing is like probably one of the fastest ways for you to understand your play mind. Because once you sing, you're no longer thinking really, because your head fills with vibration from the sound of your voice. A lot of people are hesitant to sing because the thinking has taken over to a point where you think constantly. But if you don't think constantly and you spend the time singing, you actually train your mind to not thinking or not following your thinking, but following like your feeling. It's a very simple thing. You could even just hum, just like vocalize, get your, Ingrid says in her workshops, vitalize your breath. You vitalize your breath. You breathe, but you put a sound to it.
I like that. Yeah.
So you do hum. not just doing that one is sort of a sense. You get a sense of relief, right? People, when they in pain, they make a sound. Oh, and that helps because, you're cutting through your consciousness. You're getting into a feel of yourself, you see? You're vibrating within your head. So singing is sort of the easiest 24 hours available tool that you have.
That makes a lot of sense. I never thought of it that way. Thank you. That's great. It's great.
One of the topics I wanted to bring up was the role of music education in improvising. Now, David and I are both bass players and educators. And if David and I were on the bandstand and the band leader called out, okay, guys, blues in G minor. Well, I would think G, B flat, D, F natural. Okay. That's how I outline the changes. I think probably which gives me confidence as an improviser is I know my instrument and I know my music theory and I know what note is going to stay outside. If I'm playing a blues in G minor, I'm going to do like Ron Carter, David. I'm going to play a B natural and see what the heck happens there. But I know how to resolve that note. Obviously, if my singer opens her mouth, I'm going to lay on that root because I want her pitch to be right. So improvisational music, though, is based, I think, on education, on some level of a formal education, especially David as bass players, because we are primarily accompanists. We're playing scales. We're playing notes. We have to know what role each note plays in a chord, even if...
Exactly.
Right, yeah, there is no chord.
So what's your question?
My question is the importance of music education. I think what's happening, what David and I are seeing, especially with the advent of YouTube, is a lot of young people are taking the shortcut. They'll learn how to play a piece of music, but they don't understand why that piece of music sounds the way it is.
I see. Right. Okay. Now, there are several answers to your question, of course. One of them is everything you can know about music, you can hear. So there's a lot of kids or people who already have a sense of harmonics built in, so to speak. You don't need a school to hear that a piece is in G. You hear the G. You're hearing it not because you know that there should be a G, but you're hearing it. So some of my friends went to school, but they left school after the first or second semester because they were getting confused by theory, because they heard things differently from what the teacher tells them. On the other hand, most people need to go through training, but then once that training happens, you're still going to have to go for that sound thing. And that, you as bass players, you might think like Ron Carter plays the B natural, and then he resolves it, whatever. As a bass, when you hear a sound, you're naturally inclined to play the fundamental or a fifth of it or something related to that harmonic, because you're hearing that harmonic in the bass. You're hearing from the bass up.
Right, exactly.
Right? You're hearing from down up. So therefore, the more you get into sound, the more you're going to actually play basic notes. Look at people like Charlie Hayden play just the most fundamental notes that it can find.
That was the Jimmy Webb tune, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, a live version with Pat Metheny and Charlie Hayden. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
So you're looking in the sound and you look, okay, what do I need to hear underneath that? And the theory will tell you, well, it's the one. It's the fundamental, and this is what you need to do. And it's not so much that you are deprived of choices. Right. As a matter of fact, within the fundamental note, there is thousands of choices how to make that sound, how to make that work, how to impress that bass note on the other players.
You can use the harmonic, you could slide into it, you could play it staccato, you could play it legato.
Oh, yeah. Also, like when you listen to a saxophone player or whoever you're accompanying with, a guitarist, they all have their own peculiar sound, right? Now, you as a bass player are tuning to that sound, not to a theory. You're not playing a G because it says in the theory G. You're playing that G because of the kind of sound that that guitarist has. And it'll be a little different G than you ever played before. When you listen closely enough, you will notice that every G you ever play is not the same one.
It's true.
So now it's exciting, you know. See, now the music gets exciting. It's no longer about how many notes I play. It's just how do I really tune that note?
Well, Karl, I wish I had you in the recording studio to defend me with certain producers I've worked with, because in most of my work in a pop music context, producers and even audiences want to hear the same thing over and over again. I was glad Ron Carter validated David and I's opinion that a bass line should be different from measure to measure, from chorus to chorus, from verse to verse. That's the beauty of the instrument. You can dance around it and still get the job done. But I notice, you know, we talk about Miles and Dylan and even artists of that ilk, and I've gone to their concerts and I've heard audience members complain that, gee, I couldn't recognize that Bob Dylan song, or why doesn't Miles play kind of songs from Kind of Blue like he used to? I think one of the problems we have in this country in particular, maybe other countries too, is that audiences aren't really used to hearing improvised music, especially in a pop context.
Well, the reason is simply that the music industry has been controlling of who gets to hear what. I mean, that's the main important thing. It's commercialized. You're in a situation where you don't get the exposure. People love improvised music. I live in Woodstock up here, and there's a pretty loose kind of scene going on, and people in and out, and nobody's that much into like the commercialism. And we're playing like there's hundreds of players here that play their asses off. I'm sorry to say.
It's radio, you could say that.
And they have their audience. It's not a big audience, but the audience loves it. And if I go and play for the Rednecks somewhere in the sticks, they love it. People love improvised music. If it's meant to be, like the whole thing about play, you know, a lot of people who are improvisers haven't really developed the art to a point where they're really communicating. Mm-hmm. They're playing mostly for themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's a real big problem. Like, musicians getting so immersed in their music that they're ending up playing for themselves and not for the audience. And music is there for people to listen to it. Now, even if you play in your own house and you're playing a sound, it adds to the vibration of the universe. You are always putting music out. It's called out, has to go out, not going just into you. So this is sort of a very important thing, is the attitude. The attitude has to be towards the audience. So a lot of music that I'm hearing has nothing to do with that. Yeah. It has to do with some kind of self-appreciation of whatever. And then you wonder why, when you play with their back to the audience, you shouldn't be surprised if the audience is leaving.
Well, I tell you, Karl, when I was very, very young, one of my first bands, I played with Sonny Sharrock.
Right.
And my whole life, all I wanted to be was a professional musician. So after a couple of months with Sonny, I realized I'm not going to make any money playing with Sonny as much as I enjoyed it. Right. So I immediately went studio and rock because I wanted to feed myself and eventually feed my family.
Right.
And what's so tragic about it, I'm probably not the only one. And how much great music you bring up in the book, how people are frightened to be who they are.
Right.
And it really struck a chord with me because think about, all right, so I played with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Big deal. If I would have stuck to my guns and stayed in the more, let's say, improvised avant-garde, I may have been just as far along and I may have been happier. It's an interesting thing. And you really brought up a point. I will send you the next couple of months of my therapist bill because it's your fault.
Well, sure, but there's also something, we're just stuck with the idea of style, and it's not really about that. Like for example, in an interview lately, somebody asked me, "How about your commercial work?" And I said, "What commercial work?" He said, "Well, you wrote arrangements for Bill Laswell, and You were working with Sly and Rob, and I wrote arrangements for Jeff Buckley, the album Grace, or Natalie Merchant, and so on. And I'm telling everyone, these are real, dedicated, true artists. These are all artists who are doing their thing. Like, it's not about style. It's not about having to be the great improviser. Like Jeff Buckley worked on a song. He was just as serious about that as any improviser could ever be, playing some crazy, outlandish stuff. How deep do you get into the sound and feeling of what you want to do? You have to like what you do. And then within that, the doors open stylistically in all kinds of directions. You don't need to sort of think, oh, I'm a jazz musician, so therefore all I can do is go in a little club and play my saxophone. That's not it. Look at what people like that I'm working with, like Peter Apfelbaum or Stephen Bernstein. All these people, they ain't all over the place. They play with Lee Van Helm or... Right. Whatever, they're into every kind of music, and they're putting their sound into that situation. The problem is people get tied into a stylistic thinking. Here in America, it's a little more open, but still, like Miles, for example, I'm sure a lot of stuff that Miles did at the end was to make more money. He even said it. I feel like a thief. I'm getting out of a sudden 3 zeros more than I ever did. Right? But he enjoyed himself and created his own music within that. Right. He didn't copy people, right? He was true to himself, right? Yes. Within those given situations. So nobody should put him down for it, right?
Just a thought on this now, obviously with digital technology, as we are today. We didn't have Zoom a year and a half ago. With such platforms as YouTube and streaming, artists really now have the control to be themselves. They don't have to go to a record company, say, here, put my music out. And a record company says, well, it's not a hit. It's not commercial. Your thoughts now, is it the best of times or worst of times? Because now musicians are free to distribute their music around the world without having to conform to a record company that's sole intention.
Yeah, but you see what the music industry is doing. They're controlling not the music that much anymore. They're controlling who gets paid. The tragedy right now is, as all these platforms are being developed, the musicians don't have much of a say in it. The industry is deciding who gets the royalties and where does the money go. You can now play a hit and you get from Spotify $2,500, Like, it's crazy. It's like insane. Like, they're basically putting musicians out of work. That's capitalism. The capitalism system is just like not working for the musicians at all. The tragedy right now is that there's much more diversity of music available. We could live in paradise, but why don't you pay the musicians who make the music before you pay everybody else? The other way around. The musicians get the last couple of pennies. The music industry keeps all the money. With what right? Who actually creates the music, right? The problem is, and it's actually not a problem from my point of view, it's a real revelation to see. When I had the Improvisers Orchestra in New York, every week new musicians would come, young people who would not call themselves drummers who also play, but they are musicians who do plumbing in order to make a living. But they were, in their mind foremost, they were musicians, and they were great players. All of them knew their instruments well, and there is literally thousands and thousands of people flocking to music, although it's like a hopeless situation almost. You have 2 other gigs to support yourself.
That was an excerpt from the Creative Music Orchestra conducted by Karl Berger at the Jazz Gallery, May 1st, 2012. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com.
Now in New York alone, you have to pay $2,000 just to live anywhere. We used to pay $200 for a loft or $50 in Brooklyn. So the life has gotten much harder for musicians. But the interesting thing is there is more and more musicians. It's very, very interesting. So actually, we could live in paradise if actually the industry would be formed in a non-capitalistic way, where the musicians actually get paid for what they do.
Really now the musician, to make money, at least the ones David and I know, they do it either two ways, out by playing live. And of course, COVID has put the clamp down on that. And in the beginning of COVID, by doing streaming concerts. And even now we did with Ron Carter. And also we saw Larry Grenadier, the great bass player, Larry Grenadier, did a wonderful solo concert from the Village Vanguard, where I think, David, what was the minimum donation? $10, but you could donate up to $1,000 or whatever you wanted to. So there, it seems to me like recorded music now is probably shut off to musicians, but that playing a live performance is really going to be their source of revenue, their main source.
Exactly, yeah. That's actually one of the results of the pandemic is that the world has opened up online,
Right.
That people worldwide are connecting more on that level. Fortunately, online and recorded music is still what it says. It's recorded music. You're not hearing the sound live. So there's nothing like a live concert where you're actually there, right? There is a difference still. So I hope that online concerts will generate interest for live music, so that once live music becomes more feasible again, more people will come out because one of the things that happened in the last 30 years was there's so much technology that nobody had to go out of the house to listen to everybody in the world. But now out of a sudden, people start to also realize, hopefully, there's still a difference if I hear that person and I get the vibration of that person right in front of me rather than through a medium.
Right, exactly.
And there's something else musicians really need to do. I'm not going to play for free. Yeah. So many of the musicians, I'll do that gig for free. So club owners are going, I don't have to pay these guys.
No, I know. Well, this has to do with the overflow of musicianship. But I'm hopeful that attitude, everything changes all the time, I would think that in next decade is different from the next decade and so on. Yeah. So it's like every decade is like different, in terms of, I'm in it now for like 50 some years, and every 10 years was different completely in a lot of ways. And that will continue to be the case. On the other hand, what we need is like what you're doing. We need to get the kids in school to not just learn in their heads, but learn about their feeling and about their intuition and about their inspiration and about their uniqueness, the completely unique mind that everybody brings to the table. And that's not a unique mind in terms of thinking. It's a unique mind in terms of feeling, you see?
And expressing. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I'm doing like the Gamal-Ataki rhythmic training, for example. That trains what I call beat for beat attention.
Right.
That's sort of the most important thing of all, because if you miss a beat, you miss the music.
Well, it's funny that because I was looking, when I was reading that in the book, one of the things that I teach my bass students is I have them, look, if you look at sheet music, you can, whether you know the notes or not, you can see it's going up, it's going down, it's flattening. But reading the rhythms, just the rhythms, that is more the difficulty. So I have so many of my students read out of a snare drum book by Louis Bellson so that they can start bop, 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 and they can start reading and then being a couple bars ahead. At that point, they can start throwing the music in. But as you always say, it starts with rhythm, which makes sense. I mean, we do have a heartbeat, right?
Right. There you go. So basically, rhythm study is probably the most fundamental one, because no matter what you look at, sound is rhythm. Everything is rhythm. Everything vibrates. Even the chair that you're sitting on is like music. It's like vibrating. And if you became totally aware of what your chair is like, you'd be falling flat on the floor because it's It's not even solid, Right. It's moving. Everything is moving.
Right.
Everything is rhythm.
Well, the next thing that I think was really important is your concept of sound, but more importantly, your concept of space with sound. And you put a quote in, or maybe Rick did, by Kandinsky, which is, an empty canvas is a living wonder, far lovelier than certain pictures. Wow.
Wow. Not playing.
That was Ivo Perelman on saxophone and our guest, Karl Berger, on piano. A tune called Reverie. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
So I think this is totally underestimated. Power of silence is underestimated in music completely. And Miles was a master of that. He was one of the masters of not playing. Just put a note and leave it there and let it work. Let it do its thing.
Probably one of my most favorite tunes. That was Blue and Green, the Bill Evans tune. Miles Davis on Kind of Blue, that classic recording. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com.
So if you think of music as something for listeners, which is what a lot of musicians don't go too much there. You need to think of music to be listened to. Now, if you go from that point of view, you play a note, you have to think in terms of, or feel in terms of, how does the audience react to it? All right. Now, if you're not playing the next note, that's where the listener comes in. It comes closer. He's looking for the next note. He's waiting. He's actually filling in.
Like that Ahmad Jamal example you used.
Yeah. Ahmad Jamal was an absolute master. Like Miles got all his stuff from Ahmad.
That was Ahmad Jamal. Excerpt from the Blues. Israel Crosby on bass, Vernel Fournier on drums, and this is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com.
I remember coming to New York in the 60s, and I would go to every concert that Ahmad played in town when I was there. And I tell you, several times Miles was sitting in the first row. He copped Ahmad, actually, literally, for his Riverside records, you know. These are all Ahmad Jamal arrangements. Da-da-da-dee-da-da. Da-da-dee-da, boom. Nothing, right?
That was the Miles Davis Quintet doing It Never Entered My Mind. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com.
All of that is Ahmad Jamal, yeah? You're right.
Well, you think about his most famous song is Ponciana.
I tell you one thing. If you're a musician, you can do anything you want. Every other profession is easy compared to music.
That's true.
You're right about that.
It's like child's play. Every other gig is child's play. You can just do it.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
And lastly, I would like to say one of the things I like also in the book, you mentioned, if somebody overplays, make them the solos.
Yeah, make them the solo. Yeah, there you go.
We encounter that a lot, David, working with guitar players and drummers and keyboard players where they play too much. And that's the perfect solution. Hell, just drop out and make them the solos.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's another point to this that's really amazing, too, regarding, are we playing for our listeners or are we playing for ourselves?
Right.
So much of quote unquote fusion music is based on, hey, look at how much I can do. And you're trying to impress other musicians who are going, I can do that anyway.
Right.
One other quote that, Karl, you put in the book that I just love by Einstein. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid.
Yeah.
Karl, the book is great. The book is great. I think everyone, and I mean everyone, because whether you're a musician or not, you're a listener.
Yeah.
There's so much depth and so much to learn from this book. I can't thank you enough for writing it.
Well, you know, I hope I can get it around a little bit. And I work without a publisher, and I wasn't really into thinking about how to distribute it or anything like that. So I hope that the word gets around, you know, so I'm thankful for guys like you to spread the word. And what I'm doing is, the main thing I'm doing right now And it's also important for me, like becomes almost like central. I started what is called a Patreon program.
Okay.
So it's called patreon.com, and then Karl Berger and Ingrid, so my wife, who I worked with since 40 years or so. There we are not just doing what I call a Music Mind Monthly, and also a forum about Music Mind where we discuss these points, just like we just did. But I also offer then different tiers where people can get to talk to me directly online, and then all the way to the point where they can develop their own music or practice patterns or things that pertain to their own approach. So there's all these different tiers that you can get involved. But the basic tier is actually just to be part of the forum, And what I do is I put my entire archive of everything that happened in the last 50, 60 years in there. So you're going to see music, manuscripts, CDs, everything is there, and everything new that we do. And a lot of it is exclusive too. I mean, not even put it anywhere else, Okay. I really try to get a focus on these pages, and that will generate probably more texts for interpretations of the Music Mind experience and translate it into the individual lives of different people. And it's becoming like something. So far I have like about 40 people that joined me without me trying very hard. And now I want to try a little harder and try to make it so that it becomes a platform for, let's say, worldwide for a few hundred people. If you're happy with that, you will help the listener, you will help the reader. We're answering every question. Every patron that is there, if whatever question they have, they get an answer.
One of the great benefits of digital technology.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate the work you do.
All right, Karl, thanks for talking. We'll shoot you an email when this airs, and we'll link you to the podcast and all that other stuff.
Yeah, please let me know. Let me stay in touch. Yeah, okay.
All right, very good, Karl.
Thanks, Karl.
Take care.
Great meeting you. So that's about it for tonight, folks. I want to thank Karl Berger and my co-host, Tom Semioli. And I encourage you to go out and pick up Karl's book, The Music Mind Experience. It's fantastic, and whether you're a musician or not, you will most definitely learn some amazing things from it. I can attest to that. If you've missed any of our previous shows or want to listen again, I also want to let you know that we are archiving all of our shows via our podcast, also titled Notes from an Artist, which you can find on all the major podcast players or at notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com. So, this is David Gross for co-host Tom Semioli. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.